guest?
My next guest. This is a good night for him to be here with the election 3 days away. He is one of the most erudite of American writers. His originality and wit attract a lot of attention. Would you welcome Mr. Gore Vidal? Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. I was out there before the show apologizing to John Anderson for having come out against him. He was standing in the corridor, and I tried to get around him, and I said, well, I'm seeing him for dinner tomorrow night, which indeed I am seeing Mr. Anderson.
Striking
and I was trying to
wasn't it?
tell him, oh, it was uncanny. And he just let me go on.
You standing there apologizing?
And he said, and his wife was there, and she said, I'm Kiki. I said, I know, I've met you before. I said, you know, covering up, and I realized it was not Kiki, and it was not Anderson.
Well, Gore, I imagine you can hardly contain your enthusiasm about the upcoming elections. You're just,
I'm just a bubble. There's no other way of putting it. I'm effervescing at the banana republic that we have become, or in this case, big banana republic.
What has happened this year? As I said in the monologue, it's probably the most negative type of election in many, many years. People are just turned on. I read the wonderful column you wrote, I think, a week or so ago. We'll get to about the moral majority. But what's happened?
Well, I think it's all sort of out in the open that the people of the country have nothing to do with picking the presidents. Half of the population never votes. So we think we have two political parties. Half vote in the presidential elections. That's of all who can vote. And half don't vote. Well, the half that votes is divided between Democratic, Republican, citizens, Libertarian, and the guy in the corridor.
Right.
And this is just a little game that they play. It's sort of like the Grammy Awards. You know, if you're into records and so on, it's a very exciting thing to watch these people get up there and praise one another for their various hit records. If you're not interested in it, it's pretty boring. So suddenly this party that votes has produced a president that really nobody likes. Well, Amy and some of the down-home folks probably like him. You have an actor, I mean, if Reagan gets to be president, it's going to be, we're going to be trapped in an old movie. You're going to see him on the press conferences in the morning. You're going to see his old movies at night. I mean, you're going to say, now, wait a minute, what's real?
It's like a time warp.
Exactly like a time warp. And, of course, he's, you know, Andy Hardy, Carverville. He's going to bring back the grand old days. And then Mr. Anderson just sort of proved that there was not a two-party system.
Yeah. Third parties historically have never worked, have they?
Well, not since the Republican Party started with Abraham Lincoln. It's been sort of downhill ever since. But that was the last one that really was effective. But I would think that what's going to come out of this, it's my hope and belief that this year, less than half of the people will vote. If less than half vote, the president is illegitimate. He does not represent the electorate. Now, this would be quite fascinating. The first election in which, let's say, only 48% of the people who could vote voted. Then you start over again.
Right.
And what I'm in favor of is having another constitutional convention and having a totally different political system, because this one does not work as we are observing right now.
I was watching a show the other night, and some assistant professor of political science at UCLA was discussing the turnout. And he predicted around 53% possibly. And the fellow asked him, well, what can you do to get people to vote? And he said, we don't know. He says, why don't people vote? He says, we don't know.
They don't vote because they're turned off.
Wouldn't you think when people are turned off that they would still try to make the change then by voting, but they don't find anybody that they think can make those changes? Is that it?
No, as Robert Alfonso Taft, a very distinguished conservative, once said, he said, every Republican president has been chosen by the Chase Manhattan Bank presidential candidate. He was talking about Thomas E. Dewey, but it's quite true today. And the bank, the Rockefellers, also picked the Democratic candidate. Jimmy Carter belongs to them quite as much as Ronald Reagan does, or perhaps Mr. Anderson.
So how do you take the political selection and put it back?
Well, I would say that the most patriotic thing anyone can do this year is not to vote.
Now, there's been several
That will send them a real message.
Now, I read your column on that, and yet you constantly hear on television, you hear the politicians up there, go and vote. I think Nicholas von Hoffman today had a column saying, look, if you really can't vote your heart, then don't, and you had the column about a week ago.
Yes.
If you really can't vote your conscience for any presidential candidate, go ahead and vote for your senator or the Congress. I mean,
Yeah,
there are local elections, of course, and that's sad that it might turn people off from voting in those contests. But you said that sends a message also.
Oh, yes, because if, let's say, only 45% voted, we're going to have another constitutional convention anyway. The National Taxpayers Union got together, thanks to Howard Jarvis and Proposition 13, and I think 30 states out of the 34 that are necessary have agreed to another constitutional convention, and the people who are anti-abortion want one. All sorts of people would like to see a new constitutional convention, so we're going to get one. So why not redesign the whole thing, have a parliamentary form of government, restrict the powers of the president, restrict the powers of the Supreme Court, which have got out of hand, and begin again and have a system that represented the people who live in the country. Because this one doesn't. This represents oil companies and banks.
But it never seems to come to that.
No, because the undesirable element never liquidates itself.
Yeah.
And they've got a lock on the country.
Yeah.
They own the media, they own the newspapers, they own the banks, they own the politicians, and they are extremely happy with the way things are going. They get a little grumpy when we don't vote.
Yeah.
And you see these ads on television. I roar with laughter every time I see Barbara Walters or somebody come out of a box say, "You've got to vote, you've got to vote." Why? I asked the set.
Yeah, well, they held a rally here the other day to get voters to turn out. And I said, well, if you have to hold a rally and put on entertainment to get people to go vote, why should you have to do that?
You shouldn't have to do that, and we should start again.
All right, I have to interrupt for a second. We'll be back. In the few minutes we have left, and always when you bring up this subject about the church and its relation to politics, you kind of tread a fine line, because anyone can invoke the name of the deity at any time if they don't agree with you. But there's a lot of controversy now about the church getting involved in politics, and especially trying to do away with candidates who do not fit their image of somebody who is moral. How do you feel about that?
Well, any church has the same right that any American has under the First Amendment. They have the right to speak out, and if they want to be in politics, it's okay. I had never realized until this year that Jesus was a Republican. I mean, having been born Jewish, he couldn't join many of those clubs, you know, but which are the backbone of the party. But this year it has been quite evident that Jesus is indeed a Republican, which is good to know. I would say that the thing, whenever I watch these, it's kind of dangerous what they're doing, but I think that some of these reverends are going to get into a lot of trouble. I have a proposal which would help balance the budget, too. People who worry about Scientology and the Moonies and these crazy cults and kids being brainwashed and so on, there's one way around that, because anybody can start a religion, and it's tax deductible. I mean, it's what's the word? It's, you don't pay taxes on religion, tax exempt.
Right.
I would tax all the religions. Now, the income of the Catholic Church, I think, has a portfolio of $5 billion. The income on that, they pay no tax, the United States government. Now, we got a slice of that. That would be, you know, several $100 million a year. Every time Mr. Jerry Falwell or one of these jokers gets on television, now Jesus wants another $1 million, he wants you to send him $1,000 right now, I'd say, okay, but if they're the suckers to send him the money, okay. But I'd have a guy from the IRS say, Reverend Falwell, will you step over here, please? And we want to count the tape today, and we'll take our cut.
It's a strange interpretation of, you can interpret any morality from your own viewpoint. Even though a person legally, for example, in your column, you had an interesting thing about that they were against, of course, the anti-abortion, and I'm not taking any stand, but they were against anti-abortion because that was tampering with human life, even at the moment of conception. But when it came to capital punishment, they're all for it.
Yes.
Isn't that a rather...
Well,
how do you balance that?
It's what we call in theology a divine mystery, that the fetus is sacred, but the adult is not.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that.
Thou shalt not kill, but only adults.
Right. We'll be right back. Gore, I thank you for being with us again tonight. It's always a pleasure. Hope you'll come back soon. You're going to be here for a while?
Oh, winter.
Come back and visit with us soon. Steve, we'll see you on Barney Miller. Have a nice weekend. I'm humbled by that applause.